There was a time when Steve Perry's voice ruled the airwaves, a sound so pure, so emotionally resonant, it could lift spirits, stir hearts, and echo across generations. He was the man behind Journey's greatest hits, the soaring falsetto of Don't Stop Believin', the heart-wrenching tenderness of Open Arms, and the unwavering fire behind Separate Ways. But then, as suddenly as he had risen to global fame, he vanished.
No grand press conference. No hints. He was just gone.
For years, fans speculated, journalists investigated, and musicians mourned the silence of a voice once hailed as the golden throat of rock. Rumors abounded, health issues, heartbreak, disillusionment, even death hoaxes.
But Steve Perry stayed quiet.
He retreated from the spotlight, refusing interviews, avoiding stages, and declining reunions. It was a silence as loud as his music had once been.
Until now.
Decades after his quiet exit, Steve Perry has finally opened up about the truth. And what he shared is more heartbreaking, human, and shocking than anyone expected. This is the story behind his silence, a journey into fame, loss, pain, love, redemption, and the stunning reason why one of rock's most iconic voices chose to stop singing. Stephen Perry was born on January 22, 1949, in Hanford, California, to Portuguese-American parents. Raised in a small farming town, he was surrounded by fields, trucks, and the distant hum of trains. But inside his home, something else resonated: music. His father, Ray Perry, was a vocalist and co-owner of a local radio station, KNGS. Music flowed through the walls of their modest home, from big band classics to pop standards. As a child, Steve would sit quietly and listen, absorbing every note. It wasn't long before he began mimicking the voices he heard. His mother, Mary, noticed his gift early. "You have something special," she told him one evening after dinner. "It's not just singing. You feel the music." That feeling would later define his entire career. But Steve's early years were not untouched by hardship. His parents divorced when he was young, a separation that wounded him deeply. He would often walk alone in the fields outside town, trying to understand why families broke apart. That sense of longing and emotional vulnerability would later bleed into every lyric he sang. He kept his dreams close, but his eyes were always on the stars, on Elvis Presley, Sam Cooke, and Marvin Gaye. These voices weren't just sounds, they were lifelines. In high school, Perry joined the marching band and began experimenting with drums, saxophone, and vocals. It was during this period that he realized the instrument he was born to master wasn't brass or percussion, it was his own voice. Steve Perry's path to stardom was anything but straightforward. After high school, he bounced between bands, trying to find the right fit. In the late 1960s and early 70s, he joined several unsuccessful groups, including the Sullies and Ice, and briefly pursued a solo career. But fame remained elusive. The turning point came in 1977, when a demo of Perry's vocals made its way to Journey's manager, Herbie Herbert. At the time, Journey was a struggling jazz fusion band searching for a commercial breakthrough. Perry's voice, soaring and full of raw emotion, was unlike anything they'd heard. Despite initial resistance from the band's members, especially lead guitarist Neil Schon, Perry was invited to join the group. His first performance with Journey was a small gig in San Francisco, and he was terrified. But the moment he opened his mouth, the audience was transfixed. It was clear something electric had been born. From 1978 to 1986, Perry and Journey climbed to the zenith of rock stardom. With albums like Infinity, Evolution, Departure, Escape, and Frontiers, they became one of the biggest bands in the world. Don't Stop Believin' became a cultural anthem. Perry's voice was instantly recognizable, powerful yet tender, capable of both high-octane anthems and soul-crushing ballads. Behind the scenes, though, the constant touring, recording, and pressure began to take a toll. Perry had always been a private man, sensitive to the world around him. The machinery of the music industry, its pace, its ruthlessness, began to drain him.
But still he sang.
He sang through exhaustion. He sang through heartbreak. He sang because he believed in the music.
Until he couldn't anymore.
By the mid-1980s, Journey was at its peak. But cracks had begun to form within the band. Creative differences, personality clashes, and unrelenting schedules were wearing everyone thin. Perry, who had become the public face of Journey, was under more pressure than anyone. In 1984, Perry released a solo album, Street Talk, which was a commercial success. Songs like Oh Sherry and Foolish Heart revealed a more personal side of him, free from the expectations of the band. But even this solo triumph couldn't mask the growing storm inside. Then came the first major blow. His mother, Mary, fell gravely ill. Perry was devastated. She had been his constant supporter, the one who believed in him before the world did. Her health decline shook him to his core. In 1987, he made a decision that stunned his fans and bandmates alike. He walked away.
No press release. No farewell tour. No explanation.
He simply vanished from the spotlight. Journey, left without their voice, attempted to move on. They recruited new singers, released new music and toured. But for many, it was never the same.
Fans were heartbroken.
Industry insiders were baffled. The man with the golden voice had gone silent. And he wouldn't return for nearly 2 decades. After walking away from Journey in 1987, Steve Perry didn't just leave a band, he left an entire world behind. Fame, for all its glory, had grown heavy. The expectations, the endless touring, the pressure to deliver hit after hit, it had begun to erode something in him. But more than that, there was something deeper going on, something he hadn't yet spoken about. Something that would later become the crux of the mystery. In his absence, rumors swirled. Some claimed he had a secret illness. Others believed he had become a recluse. A few even suggested he'd suffered a breakdown. But none of them knew the truth, because Steve Perry had made sure of one thing: he would not be found unless he wanted to be. He left no forwarding addresses, no phone numbers for industry contacts, and rarely spoke to the press. He moved back to Northern California, surrounding himself with privacy and the simple comforts of home. He went for long walks. He read. He listened to music, but only as a fan. He stayed away from microphones, from studios, and especially from stages. And still, his absence was felt everywhere. In the years that followed, Journey attempted to move on. They released albums with new vocalists, played arenas, and tried to capture a semblance of the past. But the truth was unavoidable: without Steve Perry, they weren't the same. Fans continued to chant his name at concerts, hold up signs begging for his return, and post letters to fan clubs pleading for answers. But Perry remained in the shadows, watching silently.
He wasn't bitter.
He wasn't angry.
He was just done.
At least, that's what he told himself.
Years passed. The world changed.
New artists rose, new genres formed, and digital platforms took over. But Steve Perry stayed silent. There were no albums, no interviews, no surprise appearances. Just the lingering mystery of his absence. Then something, or rather someone, changed everything. In 2011, Perry met a woman named Kelly Nash, a PhD psychologist and cancer survivor. He'd seen her in a documentary about living with breast cancer, and something about her spirit, her strength, and her smile drew him in. Against his usual instincts to remain detached, Perry reached out through the film's director, Patty Jenkins. Nash, a fan of Journey, was shocked to hear from the former frontman himself. They connected instantly. What started as emails and calls turned into something deeper. Perry found himself falling in love for the first time in decades. Nash was vibrant, kind, intelligent, and unafraid of the past. More importantly, she saw him not as the mythic Steve Perry, the rock god, but as a man. For the first time in years, Perry felt seen. But fate, cruel as it often is, had other plans. Nash's cancer returned not long after they began dating. Despite treatments and moments of hope, it was clear that her time was limited.
Still, Perry stayed.
He was there during hospital visits, late-night talks, quiet mornings. He held her hand, kissed her forehead, and whispered words of comfort into the silence.
She told him to sing again.
Told him the world still needed to hear his voice.
He made her a promise.
Kelly Nash passed away in December 2012. Perry was shattered. The grief, like his love for her, was all-consuming.
But it planted a seed.
Her words echoed in his mind: "Don't go back into the shadows. Don't let this be the end of your voice." For the first time in decades, he began to consider returning. Not because the industry wanted him. Not because fans were begging. But because she had asked him to. After Kelly's passing, Steve Perry didn't immediately run to the studio.
He mourned quietly.
But the grief transformed into something else: purpose. Slowly, carefully, he began to explore the idea of music again. It started with listening.
Then humming.
Then singing along to old records when no one was around. In 2014, he made a move that shocked the music world. He appeared on stage with the rock band Eels at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul, Minnesota. He sang live, for the first time in 19 years.
The crowd was stunned.
His voice, older yes, but still unmistakable. That same emotional intensity. That same soul-deep expression. Tears flowed freely in the audience.
Some screamed.
Others simply stood in silence, witnessing what they thought they would never see again.
He didn't say much that night. Just a smile. A few thank yous. Then he was gone again.
But the reappearance wasn't just a tease. Perry had been working, slowly, secretly, on new music. Inspired by his love for Kelly, he had begun writing again. And for the first time in decades, he felt a pull not from the fans, not from the fame, but from within. That pull would lead to Traces, his first solo album in 24 years. Released in 2018, Traces was unlike anything he had done before. It wasn't flashy or radio-hungry. It was intimate, vulnerable, and profoundly human. Songs like No Erison, We're Still Here, and most of all carried the weight of grief, love, and return. They were tributes to Kelly, to life, and to the long silent road he had walked. In interviews, Perry began to open up more. He spoke softly but clearly. There was still pain in his eyes, but also peace. And then, after years of mystery, he finally said the words everyone had been waiting for. I stopped singing because my heart was broken. And I didn't think I'd ever heal enough to sing again. When Steve Perry finally released Traces in 2018, it was more than just a comeback. It was a resurrection of a voice once lost to silence. The music world held its breath. Could he still sing? Would the magic still be there? The answer, as it turned out, was a resounding yes, but it wasn't the voice they remembered. It was something new. Something aged, more fragile, but deeper in spirit and story. The album debuted at No. 6 on the Billboard 200, a remarkable achievement for someone who had spent nearly 25 years away from the recording studio. Yet sales figures weren't what mattered most. What mattered was the raw, aching honesty in each track. Perry didn't try to recapture his youth, he embraced his age. The Steve Perry of Traces wasn't the stadium-filling frontman of Journey. He was a man who had loved and lost, who had buried the woman he adored, and who had walked through grief with quiet dignity. Fans wept while listening to it. They heard a man who had been holding a broken heart inside for decades. They heard him trying to heal. No More Cryin', one of the standout songs, wasn't just a lament, it was a vow. We're Still Here wasn't just nostalgia, it was a message to those who waited for him, who never gave up. In interviews promoting the album, Perry finally began to explain what had kept him away all those years. It wasn't just burnout. It wasn't just creative frustration. It wasn't even personal grief alone.
It was fear.
I was afraid to love again, he admitted in one heart-stopping interview. And I was afraid to sing again, because both of those things meant opening myself up to pain. He described how Kelly had been the one person who convinced him it was okay to feel again. But after losing her, singing felt like betraying that wound, like tearing it open again. And yet, when he finally did it, something shifted. I realized, he said, that maybe music wasn't the thing that hurt me. Maybe it was the only thing that could save me. After his return, the world was waiting for the obvious next step, a reunion with Journey. The fans wanted it. Industry insiders hinted at it. Even Neil Schon, Perry's former bandmate and the group's guitarist, publicly expressed his hope. Anytime he wants to come back, the door is open, Schon had said. Steve is family. Always has been. But Perry didn't walk through that door. The truth was, the years of separation had created more than physical distance. While time had softened some of the old wounds, others had never truly healed. The music industry had changed. Journey had moved on, with new singers, new tours, and new expectations. But more importantly, Steve Perry had changed. I don't want to be a nostalgia act, Perry said in one candid interview. I don't want to get on stage and try to sing those songs the same way I did when I was 28.
I'm not 28.
I'm a different man. I've lived a different life. He wasn't angry with his former bandmates. There was no bitterness in his voice when he spoke of them.
Just distance. And acceptance.
He even attended Journey's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017, standing beside them once again on stage, not to sing, but to honor what they'd built together. It was a moment fans had dreamed about, but even then Perry made it clear, this was closure, not a reunion. There's something sacred about what we did back then, he said. But you can't go back. And I don't want to pretend to. Still, fans held out hope. Every time Journey performed faithfully or Open Arms with a new singer, someone in the crowd would whisper, it's not the same.
And Perry knew that. He felt that.
But he also knew something else. Returning would mean chasing something he had already said goodbye to. And he had promised himself, after Kelly, after all the years of silence, that his return to music would be on his own terms.
No pressure. No labels. No expectations. Just truth.
Even after Traces, even after stepping into the light again, Steve Perry still struggled with an invisible weight, fear. It wasn't the same fear that had kept him hidden for so long. It was something more primal.
More permanent.
The fear of losing his voice. He had once described his voice as a gift I never deserved but always feared I'd lose. And for someone whose entire identity had been built around that voice, the fear of it fading, of it breaking, was unbearable. Years earlier, before his initial departure, Perry had experienced vocal issues that terrified him. He never disclosed all the details publicly, but he hinted at them often.
Throat fatigue.
Trouble hitting notes that once came effortlessly. Panic attacks backstage. A growing sense that the voice people expected, the voice that had inspired millions, was slipping through his fingers. I was terrified that one night I'd walk on stage and open my mouth and nothing would come out, he said. That fear never left him. Not even during traces. During recording sessions, he was meticulous, sometimes spending days perfecting a single vocal line. He refused to use autotune. Refused to let anyone clean up his raw takes. If my voice isn't enough, he told the producers, then I have no business doing this. But there was a deeper fear beneath that, the fear of becoming a caricature. Of being remembered not as Steve Perry the singer, but as Steve Perry who used to sing.
I don't want to be pitted, he confessed.
I'd rather disappear entirely than have people say, poor guy.
He lost his voice.
I'd rather they remember what it was, not what it became. And so, even in his return, Perry set boundaries. He refused to do large-scale tours.
He didn't overextend himself.
Every note, every appearance, was deliberate. He had made peace with his instrument, but he knew its fragility. And in that fragility, he found honesty. I sing now because I choose to, he said. Not because I have to. And that makes all the difference. When Steve Perry re-emerged, it was not just the fans who were caught off guard, it was the entire music industry. Journalists, fellow musicians, producers, and even artists who had grown up idolizing him reacted with awe, admiration, and often emotion. After all, this wasn't just a singer coming out of retirement. This was Steve Perry, the elusive voice of a generation, the myth wrapped in mystery. Many artists had cited Perry as an influence for decades. His phrasing, his emotion, his control, it wasn't something you could teach. Singers from Mariah Carey to Bruno Mars, from Chris Daughtry to Adam Lambert, had all expressed their admiration for Perry's tone and ability to connect with a lyric. When traces dropped, those same artists took to social media to share their reactions. Some called it a masterclass in restraint. Others called it the most important comeback of the decade. But what united them all was one thing: they were moved. Neil Schon, Perry's former bandmate, posted a photo of them together from the Hall of Fame ceremony with a caption, "Forever Family." For all their rocky history, it was clear there was still a deep thread of respect between them. Journalist Dan Rather, who interviewed Perry in a long-form sit-down for the big interview, was visibly emotional during their conversation. At one point, Perry leaned in and said, "I know you're going to ask me why I stopped. The truth is, I was broken. My soul was broken." Rather, never one to be shaken easily, paused and simply replied, "I believe you." Even critics who had been skeptical of a nostalgia-based return found themselves silenced by the honesty of traces. Rolling Stone wrote, "This isn't a man trying to reclaim his youth. This is a man reclaiming his truth." But behind all the praise and headlines, Perry remained as guarded as ever. He did select interviews, took part in a few promotional events, and then quietly stepped back again. It was never about a grand return. It was always about honoring the promise he made, to Kelly, to himself, and to the music. For over 2 decades, Steve Perry's fans waited. And waited. Some had grown up with Journey's music and carried it like a sacred torch through marriages, heartbreaks, births, and funerals. Others had discovered his songs years later and found something timeless in them. But all of them shared one thing, an unanswered question. Why did he leave? When Traces arrived, it came not only with music but with a message. In a heartfelt note posted to his website and shared in interviews, Perry addressed the fans directly. It was not long or overly poetic. It was raw, honest, human. "I know you've been wondering where I've been all these years," he wrote. "And I wish I had a simple answer. The truth is, I needed time. Time to heal. Time to grieve. Time to figure out who I was when the music wasn't playing." He thanked them for never giving up. For holding on to his voice even when he couldn't. For believing in him when he had stopped believing in himself. "I walked away because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of losing the most precious thing I had, my voice. But even more than that, I was afraid of losing myself. Music had become so tied to pressure, to expectations, to identity, that I couldn't tell where the music stopped and I began." And then came the line that silenced everyone. I stopped singing because I thought if I kept going, I wouldn't survive. That line hit like a freight train. He wasn't speaking metaphorically.
He meant it.
Emotionally, spiritually, even physically, he had reached a breaking point. The lights, the cameras, the performances, the perfection, it was too much. And so he had chosen silence over self-destruction. But now, he wrote, the silence had taught him something. That voice I used to fear losing, it never really left. It just needed to rest. And now, it's speaking again.
Not for the charts.
Not for the critics. Just for the people who waited. And for the woman who helped me find it again. Just when fans thought they had heard the whole story, Steve Perry dropped one final revelation that shocked even his most loyal followers. It happened during a quiet moment in an NPR interview. The host had asked a simple question: was there ever a point where you thought you'd never sing again? Perry paused for a long time. The silence stretched. And then, in a barely audible tone, he said, "There was a time I thought about ending it all." The air in the studio shifted.
The host leaned forward. You mean?
Yes,
Perry nodded.
I didn't see a reason to keep going. After my mother passed, and later after Kelly, I felt like the best parts of me had gone with them. The voice I once had felt like a burden. And I thought maybe the world didn't need me anymore. The admission was like a thunderclap. For decades, fans had speculated about health issues, industry fatigue, or personal conflicts. Few had imagined that behind it all was a man quietly battling despair. Perry went on to explain that what saved him wasn't fame. It wasn't music.
It was connection.
The people around him. The memory of his mother. The unwavering belief that Kelly had in him. And then, unexpectedly, it was the fans. I'd get letters, he said, his voice cracking. Some from kids who weren't even born when Don't Stop Believin' came out. They'd tell me how the music helped them get through cancer.
Through divorce.
Through loneliness. And I'd think, how is that even possible? I haven't sung in years. And still, they're listening. That realization struck him hard. Even in silence, his voice had lived on. Even in absence, his music had mattered. He leaned into the mic and said, I owe them everything. If I'm here today, alive, singing, trying, it's because they never stopped believing in me. Even when I had stopped.
The words weren't rehearsed.
They weren't packaged for social media.
They were real.
And in that moment, the myth of Steve Perry, the rock icon, dissolved into something far more powerful. He wasn't just a singer.
He was a survivor.
After the intimate revelations in interviews, Steve Perry became more selective about where he appeared and how often he spoke. He knew the world had questions. He understood that his fans, the journalists, the musicians, even the curious newcomers, all wanted more. But Perry had learned to live differently. No longer driven by deadlines or industry expectations, he lived each day with a quiet reverence. He would later explain that part of healing meant protecting what he had left. His voice, yes, but also his peace. He took long walks through the California countryside. He read biographies, meditated in the morning light, and reflected often on his journey. And sometimes, in the solitude of his home studio, he would sit at the piano, close his eyes, and just let the music return to him. It wasn't always easy. Age had brought its own changes. His range had shifted, his tone was weathered, and the breath control that had once dazzled millions now required discipline and patience. But he embraced it all. In fact, he loved it. This voice isn't broken, he said once with a smile. It's lived in. And it had lived through much, through the roaring heights of fame, the suffocating pressure of expectation, the devastating loss of love, and the haunting silence of disappearance. What made Steve Perry's return so extraordinary wasn't the perfection of his vocals. It was the imperfection. The human cracks in each note. The rawness. The truth. He wasn't trying to be the 80s icon anymore. He was being himself, flawed, aged, wiser, and honest. I don't want to be remembered as the guy who left, he said. I want to be remembered as someone who returned when it mattered. As years passed following the release of Traces, Steve Perry stayed active in ways that few predicted. He collaborated behind the scenes with up-and-coming artists. He contributed to charitable causes, especially cancer research, in honor of Kelly Nash. And most importantly, he began writing again. Not necessarily for another album, though he didn't rule it out.
But for himself.
Journals filled with reflections. Lyrics about time and memory. Stories from the road, from his childhood, from the silence. And though he rarely shared these publicly, he once hinted at compiling a memoir, not to cash in, but to leave something behind for those who had walked with him, even when he couldn't see them. His legacy had always been cemented by the power of Journey's music. Don't Stop Believin' had become a generational anthem, played in sports arenas, featured in movies, resurrected in television finales. But for Perry, the fame of that song wasn't what mattered. "I didn't write Don't Stop Believin' to be famous," he said. "I wrote it because I needed to believe too." And perhaps that's the essence of Steve Perry's story. He wasn't just the singer with the soaring voice. He was the quiet heart behind the curtain. The man who battled demons the world never saw. The man who, when the lights went out, chose life over legacy. Silence over spectacle. Healing over headlines. His fans didn't love him just because he hit high notes. They loved him because he told the truth. In the long history of music, few artists have vanished so completely and returned so powerfully. Fewer still have returned not with spectacle, but with humility. And perhaps none have done so while carrying the kind of weight Steve Perry bore. He didn't owe anyone an explanation, but he gave it anyway. Not in loud declarations, but in melodies. In whispers. In the spaces between lyrics. He stopped singing not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Because grief closed his throat. Because the pain of loss was louder than applause. And when he came back, he didn't come back for the charts, the fame, or the legacy. He came back because love called him. Because music called him. Because we called him. And now, as the final chords of his story fade gently into the distance, we are left with this. A voice that once defined a generation. A heart that nearly gave up. And a man who, in the face of silence, chose to sing again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart, honors the legends, and reveals the truths behind the silence.